I was asked in class the other day about how to get a better render, and one of the things to be aware of is the sort of the noise you can mitigate depending on the version of Blender you're in. So I'm in Blender 4.02 here, as you can see, and I'm going to go to my landscape, and I've got a whole load of things I've bought, but one of them is Real Water, which is a nice little add-on. And for this to work, I'm going to go to Cycles, and I will choose GPU. So if you want speed, and you can choose GPU. GPU is generally faster than CPU. And some of the features I use are experimental, so I'll put those on there. I will choose some water, it doesn't matter what, and import the assets. Now, I'll get rid of that number keypad, sorry, not number keypad, the N key. Remember, N is for the options on the right hand side. I can't see anything, so let's go to rendered view here, and number keypad 5 to go to perspective. And this just gives me some water, and this add-on is lovely because just immediately you can see I've got some water and you can see the reflection. The only issue I have with Cycles is the sort of the rendering getting sort of, this is the viewport rendering, not the main rendering, but if you can see, it sort of starts, if I drag around, you see it starts low, gets better, and I must admit I do find that a bit irritating to my eyes. However, let's zoom in a bit. So we've got a nice effect here. It works quite well. You can see the reflections, you can see the water rippling, etc. And on the right hand side, let's close that down, we have sampling. So we're in the little TV button, the render button, and we have viewport rendering and the rendering, which is basically when you go to render image or animation. The higher the samples, the better the result, which you can just play around with. But we also have denoise, and this has come in recently. And if I click on denoise, and immediately you get a better result. You see all the little fireflies, the little speckles disappear. Now this is only at the moment in the viewport render, because if you notice just a bit below on the right hand side, we have render, we have samples again, and we have denoise again. So I'm going to do a quick render. Now I'll need a camera, of course. So let's add a camera. Where are we? We go. And it's there in the middle of the water. So let's go to view, and where is it? Viewpoint, no. Align view and align active camera to view. There you go. Command or Control Alt number keypad 0. There you go. You see? So now I'm going to go to render image, and I'll pause the recording and wait for it to come up. Now the render has finished, and I did a few renders, and we can see the time here. This particular one took just over an hour, and I've done 4 renders. So if I zoom in, I switch the denoise off and on, and in this particular case I'm going to switch, I'm using the number 2 key on the top row of my keyboard to switch between the renders. You can see them in the different slots here. I'm only using 1 to 4, slot 1 to 4. So it's number 1, goes to number 1 slot, number 2, and these have the denoise. And if I zoom in a little bit, see, there we go, we can see a slight difference with or without the denoise. Now what I've also done to get a faster, so this has taken just over an hour, 2 minutes 22 and a bit seconds. If I now go to slot 3, this is where I've changed the render samples to 1, and it went from just over an hour to about 26 seconds, something like that. And again, with and without denoise. So let's go to slot 4, and 3 and 4. there's virtually no difference here. See, 30 seconds with the denoise, so in other words it takes a little bit longer, but it makes no difference. So you can get a faster render by not using denoise. You can get a better render with denoise on, and the viewport as well works the same way. So here, for example, I've got the max samples. If I set this to 1, let's zoom in a bit and let's see what we've got. And it's going to go through bit by bit. And we get a faster viewport render, and you can see it looks completely awful. But if I put the denoise on, and you see the difference. Another way to get faster renders is in Cycles, we can muck around with the light paths. The number of bounces with the light paths, the greater they are, the longer it takes to render and the better the result. The lower they are, the quicker, but doesn't look as good. If you have water, which requires things like transparency, transmission, etc., you need some of these because otherwise it will look awful. The same for glass, things like that. So increasing these will slow you down, decreasing them will speed you up. If you're not using anything reflective or refractive, then you can reduce that way down. Also, I haven't got any here, but if we had a volume, well, mind you, this is a sort of water volume at the end of the day. So, but if this was, think of like fog or something else like that, volumetric, you increase this, this will be better, you decrease this, and so on. Caustics, again, these are all on, this is for glass, etc., etc. But if I change this now up here to Eevee, and in this particular case, I'll get rid of that because that's not an Eevee water system. I'll press N here, and I'll click on this. Actually, no, click here, and here we go, Real Water Eevee, and I'll import it. There we go. And you see we get a good result. This is specifically for Eevee though, and the options are different on the right hand side, as you can see. Subsurface scattering maybe could be helpful. This is basically the light that goes sort of just under the skin, which I haven't really got here, but again, you increase that, it takes longer. Screen space reflections, yes, this is useful for things like glass, water, and so on, and you want these on, and again, you can change the amounts which will affect the speed. There aren't any volumetrics, but you can play around with these as well, and lighting. And of course, generally, the more lights you have, the more work the computer, that Blender, has to do to produce the final result. And in Eevee, at least, we also have shadows, high bit depth, which I usually use, and so on. You can play around with indirect, where is it? Indirect lighting as well. You can bake maybe, different bouncers and so on. So there's a few things you can play around with, but it's up to you. Eevee, as I said, is a bit faster compared to Cycles, but Cycles gives you better quality for more photoreal quality. And if I go, if I do F11 on my keyboard, this goes to my last render, and I'm going to slot 5, and I'll do an F12. If you're working on a laptop, by the way, as I am, I'm on a Mac, I've set my top row Mac keyboards to be proper F1 to F12 keyboards, not to do the shortcuts by default. Right, now you saw how quick that was. There you go, you see? Very, very quick. And we've got quite a decent sort of water. Although here, I suspect that might be the bloom. We can see this sort of feathering out here. Let's take off bloom. Yeah, there's a slight difference there. But let's take off screen space reflections. But you know, you can play around with these settings. Sampling for render makes a difference. For viewport makes a difference. And in Eevee, we have the viewport denoising, so I can take that off. I don't know if it makes much a difference on this example. Let's zoom in. Let's put it on. Yeah, a little bit round, you can see this glow effect around there. a little difference. But the viewport, if I set that up to 64, we get a better result, although not really much of a visual one. But it does mean things are slower for the viewport, and you normally want them to render faster, well, not faster, better. But if you're doing a test render, you can always knock the render down very, very low just to have a look and see how it goes. But there's some basic ideas on getting things faster for rendering and for moving around in your viewport. The other things, of course, you can do is if you find things when you're, like this, panning around and whatever, being slow, then you can always hide parts of things, make sure they don't render maybe as well. You can click on the camera icon here, which means you can see it but don't render it. But you can click on this so you can move around faster, but it will still render. So there's a couple of things you can do with that. But those are some ideas to get a better render in your viewport and a better final render when you go to the render menu for image and animation. Don't forget, I'm not animating here. So in the first case, I'll do F11 again and I'll go number 1. This took me over an hour. Now imagine if this was an animation with 300 frames. One frame takes an hour. So I'm going to be there for a few days. I've done that in the past and it does work, but just be aware of that. That can happen.